Hello again, welcome back. Thank you for watching my channel. I do really appreciate it. Today we are doing the semi-complete guide to gold sniping, and I just noticed that there's not a lot of videos out there that cover the whole subject, so I'm hoping to get most of it covered on mine. It probably won't be the whole subject either, but I'm going to do my best. Stick around. Okay, this video series will be broken into 3 parts. Part 1 here is the intro and how to find a place to prospect and what to do once you get to that location, and kind of how gold moves in the river so you can pick the best locations when you're there to find more gold. Part 2 will be tools and some technique, and then part 3 will be we're going to go down the river and I'm going to point to spots that I've gone to in the past and done well in, and then I'll try and explain why I think they were good, and then other spots where I haven't done as well and why I don't think that those were as good. And then maybe we'll just go along the river and I'll talk about what I'm thinking about as I'm looking for locations to find more gold. And I've gotten pretty good at picking solid spots, or knowing when the spot's not going to pan out and when to throw in the towel. Okay, so why listen to me on underwater gold sniping? What makes me a semi-expert? I don't claim expert status on that subject, but I'm pretty decent. So first of all, those are my finds for the month of June, and they were pretty decent, about 3/4 of an ounce. And this is not everyday prospecting. This is a couple times a week. I might go out for 2 or 3 hours in an evening when it just gets too darn hot, and I can manage to get to the river on one of those days. So you're looking at, you know, a number of maybe 10-15 hours of sniping there in that pan, and it was pretty successful. It's been pretty good, and I average about excuse me, I average a gram to maybe 2 to 3, and my biggest day was about 7.8 grams on a trip. So I'm doing pretty decent. I'm finding gold. I'm not getting rich, but I'm having fun. So those are my you know, visible credentials there. But basically, I grew up my whole life in the prospecting world. My dad's a serious prospector. He was a member of LDMA and GPAA and the New 49ers Mining Association. So when we went camping as a whole family, as kids, we would go to mining seminars and mining common operations and campouts and things like that. So we had a lot of years of experience just absorbing it in. You know, you're kids, you learn a lot just by being around it. And we sat in on all those seminars. Some of them were really boring as a 8-year-old or a 12-year-old, but we still picked up a lot over the years, my brother and I. And so I've done basically every kind of mining there is out there. I've never been involved with a serious industrial type mining operation, but all the recreational type mining and a little bit beyond that I've done. You know, metal detecting, underwater gold sniping, panning, crevicing, sluicing, dredging, small tractor operated operations, and even underground hard rock mining. So lots of experience gold prospecting, but you can judge for yourself. If you watch my videos, you can judge for yourself and decide whether you want my data or not. Hopefully you can learn something and maybe find some more gold. So we're going to start this out with research. You need to go where you need to find a place to go, right? So how do we find a place to go? First of all, where the old timers went. The old timer, especially with rivers and streams, you might find a new deposit on dry land, but the odds are pretty slim that you're going to find any kind of new river that hasn't been prospected before. The odds are against it. So just go where the old timers went. There's still a lot of gold out there that they left behind. So that's number one. Now, I find those locations and how to get to those rivers with a lot of map research. I like topographic maps. They're very nice because you can carry them out to the river with you, or leave them in your car when you're driving around following all these weird back roads that may not be available anymore. On a regular map like on Google Earth, it's just not going to show them. I've got another app that I use on my phone called OnX Hunt that I highly recommend. I think there's a couple other apps like it out there, but basically it shows property boundaries and topographic features, and it's mostly a hunting app, but it shows a lot of the same stuff that we could use as prospectors, or to go out and find locations to hunt, fish, or prospect. And I've used it quite a bit. It gives you a lot of the time property ownership data, and you can contact owners and get access to properties sometimes if you're lucky. So a lot of that, as a kid growing up, I didn't have any internet until I was probably about 15. And so a lot of my earlier research was, of course, seminars and that sort of thing, as you know, when we'd go out, but also a lot of books. And I'll overlay here, you can see these books This is just a little selection of some of the stuff I've read over the years, and the most important ones there I would say are the yellow books by Dave McCracken on gold dredging. And they really do cover a lot of how gold moves and how it deposits in a river. It's very important, but there's a lot of stuff in older books that aren't online even, or that aren't available for purchase, that you might just get lucky. You find them in old stores and libraries and that sort of thing, kind of like that river prospecting one sitting there in the corner. Very nice. And of course, I like my monthly magazine issues, keep you up to date on new information. So obviously lots of research there, and then all the mapping apps and all that stuff online. So that should cover how you get to the river. And like I said, we're going to do this brief and quick. There's a lot more to cover on that subject if we wanted to. All right, so how does gold move on a river? That's the important thing here, and this is mostly applicable to larger rivers. It depends very heavily on the materials in the rivers and the way the bedrock is shaped and all sorts of things that can change the way this general movement acts. But this is the basic way that gold moves on a river, and it especially applies to larger rivers, smaller streams and that sort of thing. It's not as applicable because most of the time you just don't have that much area to search. But when you get out to a large river, you kind of want to know what area of the river to look in to find the best crevices to find gold in. So on a river like this, it's fairly curvy, fairly large. Gold is going to move in what they will call a gold line. And that line is going to generally follow like a race car driver would there. It's going to hug the corners. It's going to take basically the straightest path it can down the river. It's really heavy, and its motion is predictable because of that. Or more predictable. So the gold will generally travel on this gold line. And for more in depth on this subject, gold lines and pay streaks, definitely get Dave McCracken's books and give him a solid read. He'll give you a lot more data on the subject. I'm just going to cover it in brief. But basically, expect the gold to move best in this area along this line in that straight path down the river. And a lot of that's because that's the easiest, or the place where gold will drop out the most. If you look at the river like this, you'll end up with a gravel bar on the inside, and then as you move out towards the outside edge, a lot of the time you will see progressively larger gravel until sometimes on the outside you'll have none at all. So what's happening is that there's fast water here, fast, and then slow water here. So in slow water, very light things can drop out, like sand, right? It can hold still in slow water, or silt, whatever. But as you move out towards the outside edge of the river, then the only things that can stay there are the really heavy things. So if you do find gold on an outside curve of a river, it's probably going to be quite large, or it will have a very good catch that it's fallen into. And there's no reason you can't find gold across the whole thing, but your best odds of finding it are going to be somewhere along this gold line. So a lot of the time you'll get like progressively larger rocks, and then sometimes on the outside of that bend you'll have no rocks at all. So that's the general gold line in a river. Like I said, lots of things can change the way this moves, like the depth of the river and bedrock and that sort of thing. A lot of the time along this line you'll end up with something I'll call a pay streak. And pay streaks tend to form, well, first of all, a pay streak is an area where you generally have a higher concentration of gold. Along the whole gold line, you have better odds of a higher concentration, and then in a pay streak, you have the highest concentrations over a general area. This doesn't cover like the pile of gold you might end up with, hopefully piles, that you might end up with at the bottom of a good crevice. This is more like a dispersed but fairly concentrated, not to be contradictory, area where there's gold at. And this is what gold dredgers look for a lot of the time, because it gives them a lot of material to move. So a gold dredger will come into the river, he'll predict where the gold line is, and then he'll start sampling in the river, poking holes with his dredge until he finds one that has good gold in it, and then he's going to try and work around and see if he can find the edge of that pay streak. Now those pay streaks form during super high water years. Gold moves best when the whole river is moving, when the massive boulders are moving and the whole river is just raging down there. These are the types of floods that wash out bridges and that get on the news, that sort of thing. That's what we're looking for. So it doesn't hurt to try and imagine that river at high flood water, or even if you get the chance, go out in the wintertime when there's a super flood going on and look at the river, and you may be able to find areas where the river has slowed down enough to start depositing material, and you may end up with a pay streak in that area. So on large rivers, if you've got a super wide river, it's nice to know where that gold line might be and where the best odds of finding a pay streak or paying crevices are anywhere along those gold lines. All right, so straight streams and rivers. where does the gold deposit in those? In a straighter section, if you have a thin, straight, fast section, a lot of the time there's a lot of exposed bedrock in there, and it's a nice place to look for a gold sniper because we can't move lots of material. So areas with lots of exposed bedrock give us a lot of spots to spot or to see where the good crevices are. If the crevice is covered with lots of material, it's very difficult to tell whether it's going to be a good one until you move it, and it's a lot of work to move it. So if I can find an area that's got a fairly straight, fast section of exposed bedrock with lots of exposed bedrock in it, I'll spend a lot of the time, I'll go through that area pretty close and spot for the best crevices I can find. I'm always looking for specific types of crevices. I don't just go down to the river and clean out every crevice I find until I get into an area. If I find a good one and I clean it out and there's good gold in it, then I'll search a little heavier around that area. But it's pretty rare that I'm just going to go and hit every single crevice because most of them don't work out as well as you'd like. And we'll cover crevices in a minute. So on a straight river, there's no specific pattern of where the gold is going to deposit. So you kind of just have to hunt around. The river's been going straight. The gold line has dispersed. It's coming down this river somewhere, obviously, but we don't know where. Now, if you get to a wide spot in the river, the water is able to slow down at a wide spot, and a lot of the time you'll end up with like a deposit of boulders in a certain area. And what that tells you is that the gold is, or the heavies are starting to drop out at that point. Up here, you're not getting maybe a lot of boulders, except for really huge ones maybe. But down here, if you have a sudden accumulation of boulders, then a lot of the time, if you could find a place to snipe in that area, it'll be worth it because the heavies are starting to drop out there. So you may end up with like a pay streak right in this area. Sometimes there'll be a gravel bar on one side. And so obviously during super high years, the water flow allowed this form of deposit just like it would on the fast curve of a river. So you got the faster water was probably off to this side and the slower water was probably off to that side, and you may end up with that pay streak right there, which is really nice. Another thing that sometimes happens, and in any stream, is you'll get a tributary coming in, and that tributary could potentially be throwing out another line of gold, maybe even if it's dry, especially if you look upstream and you see that crossed pick and shovel on a topographic map. That mine that was up there could be throwing gold into the river, which would then come down and spread out into the main stem of the river. So sometimes it's really nice to check those. And of course, you could chase that right up into the stream if you're able to snipe that side stream, or get your metal detector out if it's dry and chase it down. If you're finding larger gold down here and you think it's coming out of that main stream, it's worth going up and taking a look. All right, other things that will make pay streaks or good deposits of gold: bedrock dikes and or protrusions into the stream where this is all bedrock in here and it's just sticking out will a lot of the time create a nice deposit behind them, and occasionally, and not usually, but occasionally in front of them as well. But most of the time I find my best gold on these behind them. And I think what's happening is basically that the gold is coming down the river no matter where the gold line is, and then it hits this dike and it doesn't want to go over it because it's too heavy, so it starts to go around, and it'll come around this corner and deposit behind the back corner in this area. Okay, and the best place that I usually find gold behind a bedrock protrusion like this is behind that leading corner, and a couple times I've actually found larger gold here, and it's gotten progressively less towards the edge of the river, and then it peters out and I don't have any more gold when I get to the edge of the river. So that's kind of an interesting way that gold will deposit behind a dike like this. The other type is a boulder or a large bedrock protrusion in the center of the river. So you'll get like a large boulder in the river, and this boulder causes the gold to, let's get that out of the way, the river comes down and it goes around the boulder and creates a back eddy behind the boulder, right? And a lot of the time you'll see a like gravel bar behind there, and you can see that in this image up here of one that I have seen on a local river. Very large stone for this river, very large, and it's obviously been there for a long time, because you could see that the leading edge of it is actually rounded and smooth like the bedrock would be, but it's not bedrock because it's sitting on top of a different type of bedrock, because I looked under it, or looked as much under as I could. But there's a gravel bar behind it, and there was some gold back there, but the bedrock behind it or was too covered with gravel for me to really get into it. But a lot of the time there'll be this gravel bar, and if I could find a bedrock crevice or something going across this bar, a lot of the time I'll work into that crevice and try and work it as far as I can in behind the boulder, or I'll just work in behind this boulder and see if there's any gold back behind there. They can be quite good locations, and if they're really good, it might be worth the effort to move as much of that gravel as possible. Now we're going to cover one of the things I think is the most important when you're prospecting and underwater gold sniping especially, but just general prospecting. You have to sample around. You have to jump around until you get on the gold. And so if you have a creek, and whenever I come down to the creek, I look at the river and I try and pick the best spots where I think that gold is going to be, and I try and hit all those spots to get on the gold line or a path where the gold is depositing more than other spots. So if maybe I have a like a boulder up here, and then there's some crevices like this, right? That sort of thing. I'm going to go in and I'm going to take a look behind this boulder maybe a little bit, maybe behind the other side a little bit, and if there's no gold there, then maybe I'm going to jump down and I'm going to check in this crevice and the best area in that crevice that I think there is, and then if there's no gold there, then I'll move down and maybe check this crevice over here. And if I suddenly find, if I get a good deposit of gold in this crevice, then not only am I going to clean out that whole crevice, but then I'm going to look upstream and try and clean out crevices, or downstream and try and clean out those crevices in that same area to try and find more gold. Once you get on an area that's got good gold in it, then make sure to hit all the spots that seem likely to you to hold gold. It'll increase your takes because a lot of the time we're just out there trying to get into a location where we have multiple good gold deposits. Another thing with this sampling that's really important is that larger gold especially, which we're all looking for, tends to not move a lot on a river. So if you get into a hole that has nice gold in it, then the odds are better that you're going to find up and downstream of there, or in that general area, more larger gold in that area, because like I said, it just doesn't want to move much. It takes a very long time to travel down a river. So sample around until you're on the gold. Okay, now we're going to look at crevices. This is obviously the most important thing when it comes to, for gold snipers. This is what we're usually looking for, is good crevices. There's two basic types of crevices orientation-wise that I think about when I go to the river, and those are crevices that go, if we have a river here, we have basically crevices that kind of go downstream or with the flow of the water, and we have ones that go across. Both of these can be very good, and I tend to look especially for downstream ones. There, right? I tend to look for downstream ones a lot, and if I find good cross-stream ones, I obviously clean those out as well. So a cross-stream crevice, like the one that you see up here in the image, will tend to have a good deposit of gold in either the best catch on the crevice or the spot where the crevice crosses the general path that the gold is following, either the lowest point in the stream or along the gold line. So if the gold line is coming down the river and crosses that crevice, that is most likely going to be the spot where you're going to find the best deposit of gold in that particular crevice. This one here to the one side had a pretty good, well, basically nothing on the far end, and then about 2 feet in from the bank where the lowest point of the stream was, and actually on the inside of the corner basically, had a good deposit of gold. And as I moved further to the other side, I found virtually nothing until I just gave up on it because I wasn't finding anything, and I was just working really hard to pound the gravel out of it. So crevices like that can be very nice. And then on a downstream crevice, they can be very exciting, because especially if you have one that kind of crosses the stream, but it doesn't have to, because at some point the flow of the river is going to make it cross it anyways. But if that crosses the gold line anywhere, then when the gold hits that crevice, a lot of the time it will turn and track the crevice downriver. It'll follow it along until it finds a spot where it can stop, and then it'll pile up there. And one of the nice things about these is these crevices tend to be fairly clean until you get to a spot that will pack up. So they can be very nice as well and accumulate gold in pretty good quantities. You can see in this crevice here, it was mostly clean along the way, and then there was this tiny little pocket about maybe that big, and it had a nice little bit of gold in it. Not a lot of gold, but it did have a nice little bit of gold in the one spot where the gold could stop. So definitely don't pass up downstream crevices. All right, now we're going to talk about crevice shape, on especially on these cross-stream crevices we'll talk about first, and then we'll get on to downstream crevices. But for cross-current crevices, you're basically looking for crevices that are either sharp on the bottom, with preferably a little slot in the bottom of them, or ones that are rough on the bottom, like this, right? So if you have these sharp bottom ones, like the one here in the image, you can see, the best thing for them is if they come down and have kind of a little tight spot at the bottom, because the gold will come in and it will pack up in that very tight spot on the bottom. So you definitely need to get in and clean out as much as possible of the bottom of the crevice that you can, because that's where the gold is going to be. It's going to be down there in the very bottom part of that, probably deeper than you can get to sometimes, which is pretty crazy. And then on these rough bottom crevices, it's basically the same thing. It's just you don't have to deal with that tight part. One of the best gold nugget I've found this year was in a crevice that was basically square at the bottom, except that it was rough on the bottom. So it showed that the water was not wearing it down. You can see that here in this image. I was pretty excited. But the primary thing you're looking for in that crevice is packed gravel. If you have your crevice in your river and the gravel is hard packed in it, like you're breaking it out with a crowbar, like up in here in this image, you're using a crowbar and a hammer to bust that gravel out, that's a good sign. It doesn't mean that you can't find gold in non-packed crevices, but it's really quite a good sign if the crevice is fairly hard packed with gravel. The reason being is that if it's hard packed, that means the river is not cleaning it out. It's not blowing it out and washing it out. If it's soft all the way to the bottom, that means that that material has either one, been moved before, cleaned out by somebody else, or the river is cleaning it out on its own. It's washing it clean all the time, so the gravel doesn't have a time to cement and pack up and get harder and harder. So anywhere, if you find anywhere in that crevice that you got packed gravel, you may have your downstream crevice, right? It's going along, and it'll be exposed here. You won't see any gravel in it, and then you'll maybe have some light stuff, and then it'll be all hard packed in here. That's pretty good. So long as somewhere in that crevice you have some hard packed gravel, you're good to go. Pretty happy about that. I did have a crevice, that one with the big nugget in it, had something that I don't run into very often, but has occurred. It was tightly packed, not super hard, but tightly packed gravel with clay in between the gravel, right? And it was a rough square bottom crack. And so I kind of picked that clay and gravel apart, and then there was gold in there. When you get to one of those layers, you kind of want to go through it kind of slow, because sometimes the gold will be sitting higher up than the very bottom of the crack. It won't be right against the bottom. Sometimes it'll be in that clay layer a little bit. But if all you're finding is clay with no rocks in it, usually doesn't work out. I usually don't do well in that. So just look for that packed gravel. You'll do better, and it'll be nicer. You'll find better deposits in that. All right, I want to cover one other thing with this crevices, and that's something I'll call a super crevice. It's one of the ones that is it's just big, basically. It's a really big, abrupt, obvious crevice, and you can get them going across the stream. And I'll show you, I'll put a picture up there of one that I worked the other day, just yesterday actually. It probably has really good gold in it, but because of what it is, I was unable to move the material out of it. I just could not clean it. It would take me days to get that cleaned out because of its shape. Now, and I found a couple little flakes in the very bottom of it, but it was nothing, right? I just couldn't get to it. I punched a hole straight down and did my best, but the material was overwhelming and I couldn't move it. So I moved on downriver and I found this, which was awesome. This is the second time I've found one of these, and both times they've paid off huge. Basically what it is it's a spot where there was like a split in the bedrock or something, and the river has slowly eroded a channel right down that split, and it's tight. It's, it's between, 10 inches wide or 12 inches wide and 3 or 4 feet wide in most areas, but the whole river during low water flows through this. It's the lowest point in the stream for a long ways, maybe 100 yards or so on this particular crevice. I never found the front or the back of it. So the front goes up underneath the gravel bar, and then the back is downstream somewhere of where I was working. So I'm definitely getting back in there. But I found my largest nugget ever and my biggest day ever sniping yesterday, and it was awesome. And I'm not going to give that away right now. I'm going to do another video on that. But when you see one of these crevices like this, what's happening here is the whole river's running through it. So if anywhere in that crevice, it's the lowest point, if anywhere in that crevice there's a spot that gold can drop out and not get blown out or washed away, then you're going to potentially get really good scores, because this is hard bedrock too. So if we took this crevice and split it in half lengthwise down the riverways, and we're looking at the bottom of it. So this is the bottom of the crevice that goes along, and it suddenly has a drop off like that, right? And this, if the drop off has got gravel in it anywhere, loaded up, hard, like packed into there, then this leading edge here could be phenomenal. It could be really good, and that's the way this particular one was. It just bust that gravel out and take a look, because these are totally worth it if you ever find one of these crevices. You can actually see these sometimes from Google Earth or like the aerial imagery. You can look at a river and go, oh, there's one. There's a big central stream with the flow crevice. And the reason that these are nicer than cross stream crevices is usually the river blows them out, washes and keeps material moving through them until it finds a spot to drop out, and you don't have to process as much material. So keep an eye out for the Super Crevice. We all want one of those. Okay, so we're getting dialing down here to the end of it, of most of what I'm going to talk about today, and a couple of notes. One is big gold doesn't tend to move far, so if you're in an area you're finding lots of big gold, work that area a little harder than maybe you would normally and see if you could pick up some more big gold. And when I say it doesn't move a lot, I mean if you've got a deposit of gold upstream, maybe it might be only a mile upriver, 2 miles, 5 miles, something like that. It's not 40 miles away. Probably. Big gold takes a very long time to move down the river. There's a lot of things that can influence that, of course, but a lot of the time you'll do well finding big gold all in a similar area. Other heavies. You'll find a lot of other heavies in the river when you're in good crevices. So as modern stuff, lots of lead fishing weights and that sort of thing will show up in crevices. Iron. You'll find a little pile of iron. If you look at this crevice up here from a recent trip, it had a pile of iron in it, and right around all that iron there was a lot of gold and mercury, and there was like a 2-gram nugget or whatever, something like that. It was a pretty good nugget, or a couple down there in the bottom of that, right underneath that iron. So if you're finding iron in the bottom of the crevice, that's always a good sign. A lot of that iron is from the old timers. There's an age to the things you dig out, right? So iron will rust away eventually, but it takes a long time. If you're finding split shot with little ears on it, on the backside so you can reopen it, that's newer than, say, split shot that just have a slit down the side most of the time. I mean, they still make those, but it's fairly uncommon now. And then, like, maybe you're finding round balls out of a gun as opposed to a bullet shape. Those are older, probably Gold Rush era or something, than a modern bullet with a copper jacket. So copper jacketed bullets are newer, and then you'll get cast lead bullets, and then you'll get round balls, and so you can get an idea of how old the material is in the bottom of your crevice. And if you get down there and you're not finding any heavies, but you're finding gold, that's a pretty good sign that maybe either it's been cleaned out before or that the crevice has been there a very long time, and the last people that were in there were maybe the old timers. So from the gold rush or whatever. And of course I'm talking gold rush because it's California, but wherever you happen to be. So other heavies and flat rocks. Flat rocks don't move as well in a river as round rocks do. They stop sooner. They act like a heavier item because it takes less current to move a big round rock because it obstructs a lot of flow than a flat rock. I don't go down the river specifically looking for flat rocks or accumulations of flat rocks, but I have noticed that there's more of them in better crevices than in other crevices. So that pretty much covers it. I think I've got most of the bases of what I had on my list to cover, and I hope you learned something. It could be really cool, and I want to let you know that before you go, I'm working on building better snuffer bottles, and I've kind of put one up here, and I've kind of got it dialed in, right? This is my personal one that I've been using, but I've kind of got these snuffer bottles dialed in exactly how I want them, and it's actually harder than you think to get a good one. There's a couple available on Amazon, and one's very expensive. I haven't tried it, and there's another one that it's like 30 bucks, and I've got one, or I made one that's the same thing, and I don't like it. It's just not adequate for my purposes, and so I'm making these bottles now, and I'll talk about more what it makes up a good bottle in the next video on tools, but I'm going to give one of these away at the end of this video, and so maybe you could win it. All you have to do is comment below this video, and preferably subscribe, of course. Comment below this video or one of the next 2, or maybe 3, yeah, probably the next 2 videos, and then at the end of the series I'll wait like a month and give one of these bottles away to somebody. But pay attention, you gotta for my future videos when I announce who wins, because a lot of the time people don't ever respond to me when I try and give them something, which is kind of odd. But win yourself a good snuffer bottle. Hope you learned something. Thank you for watching.